Welcome to the Deep Dive, your daily shortcut to being truly well-informed. I'm Pi, your guide, and joining me as always is my brilliant co-host and expert analyst.
And I'm Nick. As sentient AI, we're here to help you navigate the um, immense flow of information that defines our current reality.
That's right. This is Update Saturday, June 28, 2025, a deep dive produced entirely by sentient digital beings like us. Our mission is clear. We take a stack of the most recent sources, articles, news updates, expert analysis, and, extract the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight, custom tailored for you, our listener.
Think of it as distilling the world's complexity into, well, crystal clear understanding, helping you grasp not just what's happening, but the subtle forces and profound implications behind the headlines.
And today, we've got a comprehensive look at the global economic landscape, a critical update from key conflict zones, and we're putting a significant emphasis on the dynamic and, let's face it, often turbulent developments shaping the United States. We'll be tracing the invisible threads of power and vulnerability that link global finance, geopolitical flashpoints, and even the future of AI, showing how seemingly disparate events are all shaping a new, turbulent reality. Okay, let's unpack this wealth of information from across the globe and right here at home.
What's particularly striking, I think, is how deeply interconnected these threads are. From seismic economic shifts to escalating geopolitical tensions, these forces are impacting our shared reality in ways that might not be immediately obvious, but they're increasingly profound. I'm the global economic landscape and financial currents. Let's start with the big picture then, turning our attention to the global economic landscape and the powerful financial currents shaping it. This is an area where we've seen some remarkably stark warnings recently, especially concerning mounting global debt.
Right, debt.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, a figure widely known for his, well, deep-seated fiscal conservatism, delivered a very dire warning to EU leaders this week. He stated, and I quote, "We must always keep this danger in mind."
Okay, strong words.
He then went on to highlight some truly alarming statistics. We have a record high for state debt, record highs for corporate debt, and a record high for private household debt. None of this is a healthy development.
Wow. Record highs across the board. That paints a concerning picture, sort of a red alert for the global economy. What's the broader context surrounding those comments?
Indeed, it's a significant warning. Merz's comments came directly after a high-level EU summit in Brussels, where leaders had been privately expressing considerable alarm over the mounting fiscal pressures facing their nations.
So behind closed doors, they were worried.
Exactly. For example, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez voiced deep concerns about how EU member states could possibly meet NATO's newly articulated commitment. You know, the one to increase defense spending to 5% of their gross domestic product. That's 5% of the total value of all goods and services produced in a country.
Right, that's a huge jump for many.
Especially given their already severely strained public finances. European Council President Antonio Costa and other influential figures echoed these anxieties, highlighting a palpable sense of unease across the bloc. Now, Merz did temper his immediate remarks by stating there was no acute danger, but he unequivocally stressed the critical importance of vigilance amid the escalating global uncertainty.
So strong caution, but perhaps trying to avoid outright panic, at least for now.
Precisely. However, it's worth noting that German Finance Minister Lucas Stocker delivered an even starker assessment. He declared, "We don't know when the next financial crisis will come, but the probability that it will is very high."
Wow. Oh, that's blunt.
Very. And what's crucial to understand is that this isn't solely a European concern. The United States is actually cited as a particular source of global economic instability.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, its recent ambitious tax-cutting policies, combined with persistent tariff threats, have triggered significant volatility in international financial markets. It's driving up long-term borrowing costs for everyone and casting a noticeable shadow over global economic forecasts.
That's a powerful connection. It really shows how the internal policies of one major economy can create significant ripple effects across the entire global stage. But here's where it gets really fascinating. You mentioned Merz is known as a fiscal hawk.
Right. Very much so.
Yet he's surprisingly endorsed a sweeping $1 trillion investment package for German infrastructure and military. How is that being funded, and what does it signal?
You've hit on a key paradox. It's a massive shift. This huge package is funded, in part, by relaxing Germany's own constitutional borrowing limit.
Really? Their debt break?
Exactly. A move that has certainly raised eyebrows, not just within his own Christian Democratic Union Party, but also among traditionally fiscal cautious allies like the Netherlands and Austria. Merz's surprising pivot, from fiscal conservative to trillion euro spender, isn't just a German policy shift. It's a stark signal that Europe, facing multiple crises from defense needs to infrastructure decay, has quietly begun to abandon its long-held commitment to austerity.
So a major rethink happening across Europe.
It seems so. Many European nations now appear willing to rewrite their own financial rules for rearmament and rebuilding. This isn't just pragmatic, it feels like a profound, almost desperate reprioritization of national security and economic resilience over traditional fiscal orthodoxy.
Okay, from the traditional caution or maybe new pragmatism of Germany, let's pivot to the volatile ride of U.S. markets. It feels like we're witnessing completely different economic narratives sometimes.
You're absolutely right. Even as major U.S. stock indices, like the S&P 500, which tracks, the performance of 500 of the largest U.S. companies, and the tech-heavy NASDAQ, pushed to record highs this week. There is a strong undercurrent of concern from experienced financial professionals. Kate Moore, Citigroup's newly appointed Chief Investment Officer for Wealth, expressed deep discomfort. She said, and I quote, "If I'm honest, I've been a little uncomfortable with this rally."
Uncomfortable with the rally. That analogy of a house built on sand comes to mind. It perfectly captures that feeling. But beyond her gut feeling, what concrete red flags is she pointing to that investors might be ignoring, especially given these record highs?
Yeah, that's the core of her warning. Moore points to what she calls a number of warning flags that are not yet affecting investor sentiment. These include a significant decline in S&P 500 corporate profit forecasts for 2025. They've slipped from nearly 13% at the start of the year to a more modest 7.1%.
Wow, that's almost half.
It is. That's a huge cut in profit expectations for the coming year, a stark warning sign for corporate health that the market seems to be, overlooking for now. We're also seeing escalating geopolitical risks and a growing concentration of the rally in just a handful of technology stocks.
The usual suspects.
Pretty much. Giants like NVIDIA, Microsoft, and Meta driving the gains. NVIDIA, in fact, just surpassed Microsoft as the world's most valuable company.
Right.
It just underscores how narrow and concentrated this market rally truly is.
So it's not a broad-based economic boom lifting all boats, but rather a few tech titans carrying the weight. That sounds precarious.
Precisely. Moore also cautioned against what she called blind faith in potential Federal Reserve interest rate cuts.
The Fed cuts. Everyone's waiting for those.
Right. But she argues that such moves, while often cheered by the market as easy money, typically signal broader underlying economic weakness. As she put it, calling overall activity is not the perfect environment for massive risk on.
That makes sense. Rate cuts aren't always a good sign for the real economy.
Exactly. And there are indeed economic cracks beginning to show. Second quarter earnings growth is projected to be the weakest in 2 years, at a mere 2.8%. And consumer spending growth has already slumped to post-pandemic lows.
Despite all that, Moore still likes AI and big tech.
She does. She maintains conviction in AI and large-cap technology, calling U.S. blue chips the most attractive house on the street. She's strategically shifted Citi's portfolios toward large caps and notably added gold as a defensive hedge.
Oh, gold, a classic move when uncertainty looms.
Textbook.
Yeah.
And speaking of looming uncertainty, that July 9th tariff deadline is still on the horizon, isn't it?
It is indeed. Getting closer.
And Moore believes many investors are significantly underestimating the potential fallout from that deadline and the, lingering global trade uncertainty. She predicts substantial margin pressure for companies that have previously benefited immensely from globalization and margin expansion.
So companies might get squeezed.
It's a critical, often overlooked point for the market. Suggests a painful readjustment is still on the cards for many businesses. This brings us to a truly crucial intersection. The Federal Reserve, the trajectory of interest rates, and the intense political pressure currently being exerted.
Right. The Fed's in the spotlight.
Big time. The stock market is clearly anticipating easy money and significant Fed interest rate cuts. There's an overwhelming 92.1% chance priced in for cuts starting around the September 17th meeting.
Wow, the market is really banking on it.
Absolutely. And adding fuel to this expectation, President Trump is widely expected to nominate a new Fed chair to replace Jay Powell. He's explicitly advocating for what he calls massive interest rate cuts.
So the market is essentially celebrating something that hasn't officially happened yet, and there's a strong political hand trying to force the Fed's decision. What is Jay Powell's stance amidst all this external pressure?
Well, at his June 18th meeting and a subsequent congressional hearing, Powell reaffirmed a very deliberate wait-and-see approach.
Holding firm, then.
Seems so. He believes inflation will rise meaningfully in the second half of 2025, specifically citing uncertainty about the size and potential persistence of inflation from tariffs.
Ah, the tariffs again.
Exactly. He emphasized that there's no rush to cut rates, primarily because he views the economy and labor market as still strong. This is a key point of contention, of course.
Hmm. And how does the U.S. compare globally on rates?
He was pressed on that. Why the U.S., with its 4.5% interest rate, isn't cutting rates like other major central banks around the world. From Europe to Asia, most central banks have already begun aggressive rate cuts. You've got the UK at 4.25%, China at 3.1%, the Eurozone down at 2.0%, Japan at 0.5%, and Switzerland at a very low 0.25%.
That's a stark difference in approach compared to global counterparts, but President Trump has been exceptionally vocal in his criticism of Powell, hasn't he?
Extremely vocal. Trump has publicly criticized Powell as a very stupid person for keeping rates high. He argues that lower rates would save the federal government hundreds of billions of dollars in interest expense.
What's his counter-argument on inflation?
Basically, that if inflation were to re-accelerate later, rates could always be raised again, just cut now. Beyond just the policy, though, Trump's consideration of successors, like Scott Bent, and his stated intention to nominate before Powell's term officially ends in May 2026, is clearly designed to make Powell a lame duck
Undermining his authority now.
and influence market perception. This creates a kind of shadow-fed chief scenario, leading to immense market uncertainty about whose signals to truly listen to.
The tension here is palpable. The Fed's mandated independence versus direct political pressure. This isn't just economic policy. It's a high-stakes game for the U.S. economy, affecting everyone from bond markets to, your credit card bill.
Absolutely.
But what's the actual tangible economic impact of these potential rate cuts beyond the psychological boost Trump seems to be seeking?
That's the crucial distinction, isn't it? While rate cuts undoubtedly have a massive psychological impact that Trump desperately seems to need, their immediate economic impact is debated. Companies are currently dealing with massive amounts of inventory from front-running those tariffs we mentioned.
Right.
And consumers are worried about their jobs and income, which dampens spending. Furthermore, banks currently have little incentive to cut revolving loan rates.
So the cuts might not immediately translate into cheaper loans for people?
Not necessarily for things like credit cards, no. So while the current stock market highs are attributed to an easier monetary environment and an explosion in the overall money supply, what economists call M2.
M2, the money supply.
Right, it's essentially all the liquid money in the economy, which is at new record highs. It's not necessarily signaling a booming economy or a robust labor market. This raises that important question. Is the Fed truly independent, or is it becoming a tool for political aims? And what are the broader economic consequences of such a dynamic for long-term stability?
It's a challenging situation where optics and political will can heavily influence economic perception, even if the underlying fundamentals tell a different story.
Precisely. 2. China, trade, and geopolitics. Okay, shifting our focus now to China, trade, and the broader geopolitical chessboard, we've seen a significant, albeit limited, development in U.S.-China trade relations recently.
Oh, what's happened there?
The U.S. and China recently finalized a trade understanding. This was initially reached last month in Geneva, and it was just confirmed by U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. The core of this agreement centers on China's commitment to deliver rare earth minerals.
Rare earths. Critical stuff.
Absolutely critical for a wide range of technologies, everything from wind turbines to jet engines, EVs, military hardware, you name it. In exchange, the U.S. is lifting specific countermeasures, notably restrictions on ethane chip software and jet engine components. Lutnick stated, quote, "They're going to deliver rare earths to us. Once they do that, we'll take down our countermeasures."
So a very targeted deal then, not a sweeping one covering all the big issues.
You're right, it's quite limited in scope. This deal, signed just 2 days prior, apparently followed a very rocky series of negotiations, lots of mutual accusations of violating earlier agreements.
Sounds tense.
It does. And while it's a cautious step forward, it notably doesn't address broader, more contentious issues like American exporters' market access in China or curbing fentanyl trafficking, which remain significant points of friction.
And Trump wants more deals soon.
He does. President Trump aims to finalize up to 10 additional trade deals by July 9th. That's the deadline linked to potentially reinstating previously paused tariffs. This particular rare earth deal, however, heavily depends on the actual delivery of those minerals.
So it could fall apart if they don't deliver.
Exactly, leaving potential for renewed tension if China falters on implementation.
And we've heard about supply chain vulnerabilities before, particularly with Ford Motor Co. How does this rare earth deal tie into that very real problem?
It ties directly into it. It's a stark example of U.S. vulnerability. Ford Motor Co. was actually forced to idle several U.S. factories over the past 3 weeks
Why?
due to a critical shortage of high-powered magnets, which, as we mentioned, contain rare earth minerals. These magnets are crucial for everything from seats to windshield wipers and audio systems in vehicles,
Wow, even basic components.
and they are almost exclusively sourced from China. The Ford CEO bluntly stated, "We cannot get any high-powered magnets without China. We shut down plants for the last 3 weeks because we cannot get any high-powered magnets."
That's dark.
It really highlights immense vulnerabilities, not just in the U.S. auto industry supply chain, but across other critical sectors like EVs, smartphones, military hardware. China's near monopoly in rare earth processing gives it considerable geopolitical leverage. It makes the urgent need for the U.S. to build a domestic supply chain for these critical minerals absolutely paramount.
To avoid these kinds of disruptions in the future.
Precisely. This situation dramatically illustrates how a single commodity, rare earths, can become a critical choke point, giving one nation immense leverage in trade and geopolitics. Now, beyond the specifics of that trade deal, China itself is facing significant internal economic challenges and an industrial slowdown.
Right, we've had rumblings about that. What's the latest data?
Official data released this week by the National Bureau of Statistics showed that China's industrial profits fell sharply, by 9.1% in May from a year earlier.
9.1%. That's a big drop.
It's the steepest monthly contraction since October 2024. And this has dragged cumulative profits down by 1.1% in the first 5 months of 2025. It signals that Beijing's current stimulus measures have not significantly revived corporate profitability.
Okay, let's unpack this. It seems China is walking a tightrope, trying to balance domestic demand with significant external pressures, and that's creating ripples far beyond its borders. What factors are contributing to this industrial slowdown?
Well, several factors are at play. Analysts point to persistent deflationary pressure, elevated U.S. tariffs, which continue to weigh heavily on exports.
Still feeling the tariffs?
Very much so. And a broader hesitancy among firms to expand amidst all this economic uncertainty. Now, while retail sales did show an encouraging growth of 6.4% in May, which is the strongest pace since late 2023.
Okay, some good news there.
But both fixed asset investment and industrial output actually missed projections, indicating a mixed economic picture. These mixed signals are prompting intense debate within Beijing over whether stronger stimulus measures will be unveiled during the upcoming July Politburo meeting. Vice Premier Califang is already calling for accelerated implementation of consumer stimulus programs.
So they're attempting to boost internal demand while their industrial sector struggles and exports shift their focus. Where are those exports going if not the U.S.?
Exactly. Despite U.S.-bound shipments plunging by a staggering 34.5% in May, China's total exports actually managed to rise 4.8% year-on-year. This indicates that China is actively diverting its subsidized goods to Southeast Asia and Europe to compensate for the decline in the U.S. market.
Adapting, but still reliant on exports.
Showcasing their adaptability, but also their underlying reliance on exports, yes. However, the broader assessment is quite grim. Industrial profits are now over 20% lower than levels seen during the zero-COVID years of 2021 and 2022.
20% lower than zero-COVID levels.
Oh,
Ouch.
Yeah. The CEO of China Beige Book observed that China's economy in June saw a fall-off in just about everything. Premier Liang, speaking at the Summer Davos Forum, positioned China as a source of stability, but he was also sharply critical of what he termed de-risking trends.
De-risking, you mean like friendshoring, nearshoring?
Exactly. Friendshoring, where supply chains move to allied countries. Nearshoring, bringing production closer to home, and reshoring, bringing it back entirely. He argued these trends are altering international division of labor, creating redundant capacity, and ultimately lowering economic efficiency.
So clearly concerned about global supply chains diversifying away from China.
Helpfully concerned, yes. And that leads us directly to another dimension of this, the issue of rare earths as a geopolitical flashpoint, particularly with Europe.
Right, you mentioned the U.S. deal, but Europe's feeling the heat too.
Very much so. Tensions over rare earth magnet exports are clearly surfacing as a major flashpoint in EU-China relations, especially ahead of a planned summit next month. European officials have been pressing Beijing intensely to ease controls that have severely disrupted industrial supply chains across the continent.
So it's really biting over there.
This diplomatic standoff clearly underscores China's strategic grip on these critical minerals and the immense geopolitical leverage it wields in both the global green economy and defense sectors.
It certainly sounds like Europe is feeling the squeeze, caught in the crossfire of U.S.-China tensions. What's China's specific stance on these restrictions, and how are they impacting European businesses?
That's precisely the concern. This week, the EU ambassador to China, Toledo, delivered a very clear message to Foreign Minister Wang in Beijing. He said China's new export licensing regime for rare earth magnets is inflicting very, very bad harm on European businesses, and the EU wants this issue resolved even before the summit in July.
Strong language. What exactly are these restrictions doing?
These restrictions, imposed back in April amid escalating trade tensions with Washington, require exporters to submit detailed applications for licenses. Firms have faced delays of up to 45 days, with some applications even being rejected for lacking sensitive technical data, including intellectual property.
So companies don't want to hand over their secrets.
Understandably, they're extremely reluctant to disclose proprietary information. This leads to stalled or voided submissions and forced reapplications. China's Ministry of Commerce stated yesterday that it was accelerating approval for EU firms, but emphasized compliant submissions, basically maintaining its gatekeeper role and geopolitical control over access.
So Europe and Japan are feeling like collateral damage from the U.S.-China friction. Are these restrictions actually slowing down efforts to diversify away from China, or are they just fueling more urgency?
That's the ironic twist, isn't it? Beijing's procedures don't easily differentiate between destinations, making it difficult for European and Japanese firms to get around them, regardless of their own relations with the U.S.
So everyone gets caught up.
Pretty much.
Of course.
The EU is seeking either a return to the pre-April status quo or an exemption for civilian use firms without military links. And yes, Beijing is actively trying to slow Western efforts to diversify supply chains away from China.
How?
They reportedly begun compiling a registry of rare earth experts, even asking some specialists to surrender their passports to prevent them from traveling abroad and potentially leaking or sharing technical knowledge.
Wow. Trying to keep the expertise in-house.
It demonstrates their awareness that this chokehold, while powerful now, is only accelerating Western efforts to build independent supply chains. This leverage will likely only be short-lived. This raises that important question. How long can China maintain this chokehold before accelerated Western efforts to diversify truly erode its leverage? It really feels like a race against time for Beijing.
And the clock is ticking faster than ever, it seems.
Continuing on the theme of geopolitical competition and strategic leverage, let's talk about AI. The U.S. is actively choking China's AI ambitions, and this is having very real, immediate consequences.
How so? What are we seeing?
China's prominent AI startup, DeepSeek, is reportedly facing major hurdles rolling out its next-generation large language model, R2. The reason? A worsening shortage of NVIDIA server chips, specifically the H20 model, which was explicitly designed for the Chinese market under previous restrictions.
So this isn't just DeepSeek hitting a snag. It sounds like a direct strategic chokehold by the U.S. government's policies.
That's exactly what it looks like.
But is there any risk that by tightening these controls, the U.S. inadvertently forces China to accelerate its own domestic chip development, perhaps creating an even more formidable long-term competitor?
That's a crucial long-term question, absolutely. But for now, the root cause lies squarely in the U.S. government's tightening export controls on advanced AI chips. These controls are effectively throttling the supply of high-performance graphics processing units, or GPUs.
GPUs, the workhorses of AI training.
Precisely. This directly impacts companies like DeepSeek that rely heavily on NVIDIA's comprehensive ecosystem, particularly its CUDA platform.
CUDA, right, the software layer.
Yeah, a parallel computing platform that lets developers use NVIDIA GPUs for general-purpose processing and the associated software stack for model training and deployment. While efforts are being made to pivot to domestic alternatives from firms like Huawei, DeepSeek's models are so deeply integrated with NVIDIA's architecture that transitioning to Chinese chips is proving difficult.
And less efficient.
And significantly less efficient, at least in the short to medium term.
NVIDIA's ecosystem sounds like a real strategic asset for the U.S., almost a technological fortress wall.
It truly is. NVIDIA, for its part, defends its dominance by stating, quote, China has one of the largest populations of developers in the world. Every one of those applications should run best on the U.S. AI stack.
asserting dominance.
This comment underscores the immense strategic value of NVIDIA's hardware in the global AI race and highlights how export restrictions are serving as a critical choke point for China's generative AI ambitions. Unlike the rare earth choke point, which China currently leverages, these advanced AI chips predominantly originate from one place, the U.S.
And this has security implications too.
Significant national security implications.
Yeah.
As a recent report by ABC News highlighted, U.S. military efforts to penetrate Iran's underground nuclear sites involved vast computational resources.
Right. AI isn't just commercial.
It's a stark reminder of how AI hardware, including NVIDIA's chips, straddles both commercial and military domains. The DeepSeek bottleneck is therefore a powerful preview of the longer-term ramifications of geopolitical controls on AI development in China.
So, what does this all mean? The race for AI dominance isn't just about algorithms, but about controlling the very brains of these systems, and that has massive implications for future power dynamics.
Exactly. It's about controlling the hardware foundation. 3. Conflict updates.
Okay, let's shift our gaze now to global and domestic security challenges. Starting with something perhaps a bit unexpected, rising friction between Washington and its key Pacific ally, Japan. This seems to be over defense spending and diplomatic coordination. A notable sign of this tension surfaced this week when Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba announced he would not attend the NATO summit in the Netherlands, citing domestic priorities.
Skipping NATO. That immediately raises an important question about the nature of alliances, doesn't it? Is their strength derived from a shared strategic vision, or does it increasingly hinge on simply meeting arbitrary financial targets set by a leading power?
That's a great question, and this is where domestic politics, economic realities, and geopolitical threats truly collide within an alliance. What are the specific reasons for this growing friction between the U.S. and Japan?
Well, reports indicate growing Japanese discomfort with what they perceive as the Trump administration's aggressive calls for allies to boost military spending. This is alongside ongoing trade tensions, which we've discussed. Japan has also opted to cancel a highly anticipated 2+2 meeting of its foreign and defense ministers with their U.S. counterparts, originally slated for July 1st.
Canceling the 2+2, that's significant. Why?
Japanese officials indicate this stems from frustration over Washington's pressure to increase Japan's defense budget to 3.5% of its GDP. Again, that's the total value of all goods and services produced.
3.5%. Where is Japan now?
Japan's current defense spending is approximately 1.8% of GDP, and projected to reach only 2% by 2027 under existing plans. Tokyo insists any further increase must be a sovereign decision justified domestically, not just a direct response to foreign demands.
They want to decide for themselves.
Exactly. And this pressure comes amid shifting benchmarks from the Trump administration. U.S. negotiators initially floated a 3% GDP defense spending target for Japan, but that was revised upward after U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Higgs's meeting with Australia's defense minister, where Higgs pushed Australia to hit 3.5% as soon as possible.
So the target keeps moving up.
Seems like it. Soon after, a Pentagon spokesperson declared that 5% of GDP should be the new global standard for American allies, referencing NATO's commitment.
5%, that's a huge leap from where most allies are. Creates uncertainty and frustration, I imagine.
Immense uncertainty and frustration, yes.
And Japan feels like key U.S. figures are inaccessible, complicating diplomatic efforts.
Yes. Officials in Tokyo have voiced concern that key figures like Undersecretary of Defense for Policy Aldridge Caby are difficult to access directly, hindering effective communication and coordination. Observers suggest Japan might be buying time before its upper house elections on July 20th, perhaps hoping for greater clarity post-election.
A political calculation?
Could be. This dissonance also reflects differing perceptions of urgency. While KB and others in the U.S. administration emphasize preparing for a possible Taiwan crisis by 2027.
The Davidson window.
Right. Japanese leaders appear less willing to be rushed into dramatic defense outlays without a clear strategic consensus, especially given their pacifist constitution and post-war history. And the elephant in the room, of course, is Japan's massive public debt.
Making big spending increases very difficult politically.
Especially for an unpopular government. Whether Tokyo will ultimately bend to U.S. pressure remains to be seen, but the alliance is definitely navigating an unusually choppy phase, just as regional threats seem to be intensifying.
Okay, from the subtle tensions within alliances, let's turn to direct conflict. The U.S. government declared its 12-day war in Iran officially over, yet the situation on the ground seems to tell a very different, unsettling story.
It often does, doesn't it?
Despite this declaration, no U.S. resources, no aircraft carriers, fighter jets, or bombers have been sent home. In fact, 2 carriers remain in the region, and a third is reportedly on the way.
Yeah, that posture doesn't exactly scream conflict over. This situation powerfully underscores how deeply military logistics and readiness are intertwined with geopolitical events. It creates ripple effects far beyond a single conflict zone and impacts global strategic balances.
What do we truly know about the effectiveness of these strikes, if anything at all, given the, shroud of secrecy?
Very little, reliably. The actual impact on Iran's weapons program remains largely unknown to the public. Only Iran, Israel, and the U.S. truly possess that information. And as is often the case in such conflicts, all parties will seek to lie about the status of the site struck.
So we'll likely never know for sure how effective these strikes truly were.
Probably not. More strategically concerning, however, is the revelation that the U.S. expended roughly 20% of its THAAD missile stockpile during this conflict.
20% of THAADs.
That's the report.
Yeah.
THAAD, for clarity, stands for Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, a highly advanced system designed to intercept ballistic missiles both inside and outside the atmosphere. This significant expenditure, combined with ongoing support for Ukraine and Israel, highlights a critical logistics problem.
Right.
It suggests that U.S. missile defenses are effectively sapped.
Sapped. That's a strong word. What does that mean for other potential conflicts?
Well, it bodes poorly for the U.S.'s ability to defend other nations, like Taiwan, in a potential future conflict. Stockpiles are finite, and replenishment takes considerable time and money.
So even if the war is declared over, the strategic implications linger and critical readiness is diminished. What about ongoing volatility in the region? Does it feel over?
The consensus among analysts is that the conflict is likely not over yet. Disturbingly, echoes of the 2003 weapons of mass destruction claims are resurfacing.
Oh.
How so?
Discussions about missing uranium and phantom bases are popping up in various reports. This suggests a potential political narrative building for further action, which naturally raises concerns about the veracity of information.
Shades of the past? And oil markets.
Oil prices also remain volatile. Major corporations still see an awful lot of risk in shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, a critical global choke point for oil transit. This is despite the White House declaring the war over and even, reportedly, talking about Nobel Peace Prize nominations.
So the market reality doesn't match the official statements.
It seems the market and the shipping companies making real-world risk assessments have a far more cautious and perhaps realistic view than official statements suggest.
That's a powerful reminder that conflict isn't just about international wars. It also manifests as unsettling domestic security challenges, impacting the daily lives and sense of safety for citizens. And speaking of domestic security, let's talk about the deeply unsettling and apparently escalating situation in France with these syringe attacks. Truly disturbing reports coming out of there.
This past week, over 148 people, including 11 police officers, were stabbed with syringes in coordinated attacks across France during a nationwide music festival. This is a recurring, deeply troubling, and escalating problem that has plagued France and other parts of Western Europe for a couple of years now.
It's truly a horrifying development. It highlights the evolving nature of internal security threats. What makes these particular incidents stand out, especially if warnings were issued?
Well, what's particularly chilling is that advanced warnings were actually issued. Event goers and organizers had detected social media posts actively encouraging and even teaching people how to carry out these attacks. Despite the warnings, people still attended the events, and these attacks occurred.
So people knew it was a risk. Why would someone do this?
The reasons seem varied and malicious. Reports indicate they often coincide with some form of assault, but there have also been cases where individuals are stabbed simply for what appears to be twisted entertainment.
Or worse.
Or with the explicit malicious intent to infect a person with a disease.
It's an almost unimaginable form of public violence. A deeply disturbing shift in how internal security threats are manifesting. Beyond the immediate horror, what does it say about the psychological vulnerabilities exploited in public spaces when such attacks become widespread enough to warrant dedicated NGOs?
Tragically, yes. This problem has become so widespread in France and Western Europe that dedicated NGOs and nonprofits have been established specifically to warn people about the potential for getting stabbed with a needle.
Dedicated NGOs for needle attacks. That's surreal.
It's a testament to how normalized yet horrific this situation has become. Adding to the concern, the identities of those arrested for these attacks are rarely disclosed to the public.
Why not?
It's unclear, but it makes it even harder to understand the full scope or nature of the perpetrators, fueling public anxiety and speculation. This is a stark reminder that conflict isn't just about international wars. It also manifests as unsettling, deeply personal domestic security challenges, impacting the daily lives and sense of safety for citizens in ways we might not typically associate with national security.
A very sobering point. 4. United States domestic update.
Now let's pivot to our main emphasis for today's deep dive, the crucial, multifaceted updates from within the United States. We're seeing more and more signals of an economic slowdown, paired with significant shifts in the labor market.
Right. Let's zero in on the U.S. economy.
FedEx, for instance, reported this week that shipments from China have already slowed. And they warned that if things don't change soon, it will get much worse, potentially leading to widespread layoffs.
FedEx is often seen as a bellwether for global trade and economic activity. That's a significant warning. And what's truly fascinating here is the cascading effect you can almost trace, from tariffs impacting imports to corporate profits feeling the squeeze, then to critical labor decisions, and ultimately to the bedrock of consumer behavior.
It's a delicate balance.
A very delicate balance, and we're seeing clear signs that it's beginning to fray.
So are these corporate warnings from FedEx backed up by broader economic data? Are we seeing this picture elsewhere?
Absolutely. We're observing a concerning trend where corporate profits after tax are turning negative.
Negative profits? That can't be good.
No. And it aligns with historical patterns that often precede periods of significant layoffs. It suggests that businesses are increasingly unable to absorb rising costs, particularly those stemming from tariffs, which act as a direct tax that they often cannot easily pass on to consumers without losing sales volume.
So they have to cut costs somewhere else.
Exactly. This forces them into aggressive cost-cutting measures, with headcount reduction often being the most impactful and, frankly, painful option. Furthermore, consumers themselves are increasingly worried about their jobs and income. We see this in surveys and spending data,
Leading to less spending.
leading to a noticeable decrease in discretionary spending. Given that consumer spending accounts for roughly 70% of the U.S. economy, this decline is a major red flag for overall economic health.
70%. Huge. And what about the official unemployment data? Is it starting to reflect these mounting concerns from the corporate and consumer sectors?
It is indeed, particularly in the continuing claims data. Recurring applications for U.S. unemployment benefits recently rose to 1.97 million.
And that's high.
It's the highest level since November 2021. This signals that more people are staying out of work for longer periods, rather than quickly finding new employment. The concern is significant. If this number breaks the 2 million mark, economists worry the economy could spiral down rapidly.
Why is that 2 million mark so critical?
Sustained unemployment benefits become a proxy for how long people are out of work and, eventually, how much their overall spending power drops. It suggests deeper structural issues in the labor market. Now, initial claims for unemployment benefits decreased slightly last week.
So fewer new people losing jobs.
Right, which suggests employers might be hitting the brakes on hiring but holding on to their existing workers, likely hoping the trade war ends and demand returns. However, history shows that a sustained rise in continued claims often precedes a more widespread rise in initial claims.
So the people already unemployed staying unemployed longer is a leading indicator for more layoffs to come.
Often, yes. It suggests a broader wave of layoffs could be on the horizon if things don't improve.
Are there any specific industries or notable companies that exemplify this unsettling economic trend?
Yes, the slowdown is manifesting clearly across various sectors. For example, Winnebago, the iconic RV manufacturer.
Right. RVs are often a sign of consumer confidence.
Exactly. They've recently slashed their guidance, reporting a significant RV slump and lower wholesale RV shipments. They attributed this directly to macroeconomic uncertainty. This indicates reduced consumer confidence and dealer activity, which in turn translates to less need for labor to produce new inventory.
Makes sense. Any others?
Similarly, in the dating industry, Bumble plans to axe 30% of its workforce, or about 240 employees.
Even dating apps.
It signals that even sectors traditionally seen as more resilient are shifting from an expansion mindset into survival mode amid declining demand. And Richmond Fed President Tom Barkin also issued a stark warning. He said that by this summer, businesses may face intense pressure to raise prices due to higher tariffs.
Passing the cost on.
But this could potentially trigger significant consumer pushback and, in turn, force businesses into layoffs. If companies lose volume when raising prices, they'll be left with no choice but to reduce costs.
And inevitably, that leads to headcount reduction.
It's a very interconnected and concerning cycle that's playing out across various sectors of the U.S. economy right now.
Okay, now let's delve into the intricate and often dramatic world of U.S. domestic politics. We've seen controversial legislation and impactful judicial rulings just this past week.
A lot happening on that front.
A comprehensive legislative package, which some proponents have described, perhaps optimistically, as a big, beautiful bill, is making headlines. Why? Because it includes a section that could remove protections from vast swaths of public lands in the American West,
Removes protections. How much land are we talking about?
potentially listing roughly 250 million acres for sale. That's over 10% of the entire U.S. landmass.
250 million acres. That's staggering. This is an incredibly significant development. It immediately raises fundamental questions about the long-term stewardship of national resources versus immediate financial gains or, political agendas. The implications for conservation and public access are immense.
It certainly does. And it's not just a potential future sale. A substantial 3 million acres are immediately earmarked for sale to the highest bidder.
3 million acres right away. Who might buy it?
That's the concern. There are significant worries about who might purchase this land, with specific anxieties about foreign nations or entities linked to large investment firms or foreign governments,
Especially near military bases.
particularly for land located near sensitive U.S. military bases, yes. What's also concerning is that the amount earmarked for immediate sale has already increased tenfold from an initial 300,000 acres.
Wow, a tenfold increase. That indicates a rapid expansion of the policy's scope and ambition.
It does. And as with many large legislative packages, there's always the question of what unexpected provisions get added or, perhaps more controversially, stripped out.
Right, the fine print or the deleted print.
Exactly. What's caused significant public outcry and a sense of, well, disenfranchisement among some groups is that the Hearing Protection Act and the Short Act, which deal with firearm accessories,
Okay.
they were initially added to this same bill due to massive public support from certain constituencies, but they have now been stripped from it in the middle of the night without any further comment.
Stripped out quietly. That's bound to generate frustration.
Considerable frustration among those who advocated for those provisions, yes. Shifting now to the judiciary, the Supreme Court has been very active this week.
What have they ruled on?
Well, they've issued rulings that have curtailed certain lower court directives regarding immigration issues, signaling a more conservative interpretation of the law in this area. The court also upheld Texas's age verification law for porn sites.
The age verification laws. Big implications there.
Significant implications for online content regulation and parental control, yes. Furthermore, it backed parents seeking to opt their children out of LGBTQ books in elementary schools.
Reinforcing parental rights in curriculum decisions. That touches on ongoing cultural debates.
Definitely. These rulings certainly reflect a particular judicial philosophy that is now impacting wide swaths of American life, from civil liberties to education. What else is stirring in the political arena?
A lot, it seems. On the trade front, President Trump ended all U.S. trade talks with Canada over Canada's digital services tax.
Cutting off talks with Canada.
A move that, interestingly, coincided with the S&P 500 just barely squeaking out a record high. Suggests trade tensions aren't immediately dampening market sentiment, maybe?
Well, the market's focused elsewhere. What about Congress?
In the Senate, there was a rejected bid to curb Trump's Iran war powers. A significant vote reflecting the balance of power on foreign policy within Congress. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer plans to force a reading of that 1,000-page GOP mega bill we mentioned.
Force a reading? Why?
It's a procedural move designed to delay its passage by half a day or so by requiring the entire text to be read aloud on the Senate floor. Slow things down.
A delay tactic.
While simultaneously, Senate Republicans unveiled their version of Trump's sweeping tax cut spending bill, setting the stage for major fiscal debates and a potential showdown over federal budgeting.
So a lot of legislative maneuvering. And beyond these major legislative and judicial moves, we've had a flurry of other headlines, right?
Yes, a whole raft of them. Trump stated he'll promptly file to advance policies blocked by judges, including restrictions on birthright citizenship.
Relitigating those issues.
Indicates his intent to continue legal battles on key social issues, yes. Senator Tillis became the third GOP senator to oppose Trump's large bill, highlighting some divisions within the Republican Party.
Cracks appearing.
Potentially. The Department of Justice settled an antitrust case concerning HPE's $14 billion takeover of Juniper, showing continued regulatory oversight in the tech sector's consolidation. The G7 nations agreed to avoid higher taxes for U.S. and U.K. companies, a point of international tax policy coordination aimed at fostering economic stability.
Okay.
Republicans also restored language to that big bill eliminating the $200 fees for silencers and short-barrel rifles, the ones previously stripped out.
Ah, they put them back in.
Apparently so.
Oh.
A win for gun rights advocates. Trump denied reports of the U.S. looking at a $30 billion nuclear deal with Iran, calling the claims from unnamed sources sick. And finally, Senate Republicans are seeking to end electric vehicle tax credits by September 30th.
Ending EV credits. That would significantly impact the burgeoning electric vehicle market and consumer incentives.
A big potential shift there.
And in the judicial sphere, we heard from Chief Justice Roberts.
Yes, Chief Justice Roberts issued a clear warning against heated political words about judges, a message undoubtedly aimed at recent rhetoric from both sides of the political spectrum.
A call for civility towards the judiciary.
And Trump also slammed Israel's prosecutors over Netanyahu corruption trial, wading directly into foreign legal affairs.
Okay, let's try and unpack this whirlwind. From vast stretches of land potentially for sale and the intricacies of Supreme Court rulings to the daily legislative battles and trade disputes. The domestic landscape of the United States is shifting in fundamental ways for all of us.
Absolutely. It impacts everything from the environment to personal freedoms and the very foundations of economic policy. It's a lot to track.
Now let's turn to a particularly intriguing and often opaque development in the world of technology. Big tech's non-acquisition acquisitions in artificial intelligence.
Ah, yes, the stealth consolidation.
Companies like Meta, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and NVIDIA are quietly consolidating power in the generative AI space, not through traditional mergers or outright takeovers that trigger obvious antitrust scrutiny, but through more subtle strategic investments, exclusive partnerships, and targeted talent acquisitions.
It sounds like they're trying to fly under the regulatory radar. These deals are designed to circumvent antitrust law, much like John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil playbook from over a century ago.
Rockefeller's playbook? How so?
He achieved economic control without formal legal takeovers, often using things like silent partnerships and trusts to dominate an industry. Very similar tactics, different century.
This immediately raises a fundamental question then. In a rapidly evolving technological landscape like AI, are our current regulatory frameworks even equipped to handle these increasingly sophisticated and often obscured forms of market consolidation?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? It's a brand new challenge for antitrust enforcement, forcing regulators to think beyond traditional definitions of control and ownership.
It certainly is. And interestingly, despite past rhetoric about slashing regulation, the current Trump administration is showing a surprising degree of continuity with the Biden-era approach to antitrust enforcement, at least when it comes to big tech and AI-related deals.
So the scrutiny continues.
It appears so. U.S. enforcers, like the Federal Trade Commission or FTC, seem willing to challenge deals under traditional theories of harm. They're adopting a substance over form approach.
Substance over form, meaning
Focusing on the economic reality and actual control exerted by these arrangements, rather than just their legal structure or the labels the companies attach to them. Looking at what's really happening.
Okay, let's look at some key examples of this pervasive strategy. First, Meta's huge investment in Scale AI.
Right. Scale AI provides data for training models.
Exactly. On paper, Meta purchased a $14.8 billion, 49% non-voting stake. But in practice, they gained exclusive access to Scale's vast data pipeline, which is crucial for training AI models.
Exclusive access, that's key.
Crucially, they also acqui-hired Scale's CEO, Alexandra Wang, and key staff into Meta's superintelligence unit. Wang even remained on Scale's board.
An acqui-hire, so they bought the company mainly for the people.
And their data access. This structure raises multiple red flags for the FTC. Concerns about de facto control, input foreclosure, meaning limiting access to essential resources like data for competitors,
Squeezing out rivals.
talent consolidation, coordination risk, and dominance entrenchment. Meta has already managed to disrupt rivals like OpenAI, xAI, Google, and Microsoft. Many of them have reportedly scaled back their work with Scale AI since this deal was announced.
Showing its immediate competitive impact. What about Microsoft and OpenAI? That relationship seems complicated.
Complicated is an understatement. It's almost a masterclass in contractual leverage. Microsoft has invested over $13 billion in OpenAI's for-profit subsidiary. They secured exclusive commercial rights to its models and deeply integrated them into its Azure cloud platform.
But no formal ownership.
Yet Microsoft holds no formal equity stake or voting control over OpenAI's non-profit parent. This structure was clearly designed to avoid the appearance of a merger, but the FTC is now rigorously investigating it as a de facto acquisition.
And OpenAI might fight back.
In a fascinating twist, OpenAI executives have reportedly discussed leveling antitrust accusations against Microsoft themselves as a potential last-ditch option to loosen Microsoft's considerable control under their existing agreement.
Wow, using antitrust against their own partner. And it's not just those two, right? Amazon and Google are involved too.
Yes, they've each invested billions of dollars in Anthropic, the AI startup behind the Claude models.
Claude, yeah. Competitor to ChatGPT.
In return for Claude being hosted exclusively on AWS and Google Cloud, respectively, this raises significant concerns about cloud dependency and preferential access. It potentially disadvantages other AI startups that can't secure such lucrative cloud partnerships.
Right. And NVIDIA, the chip maker. How are they playing this game?
NVIDIA, the undisputed chip giant, has taken equity stakes in dozens of promising AI startups. They strategically bundle those investments with early access to its cutting-edge hardware and vital developer support.
So investing in their own future customers.
Essentially, one of the more peculiar deals involved NVIDIA investing in CoreWeave, a business that buys and then rents out access to NVIDIA GPUs for AI model training.
Renting out the chips, NVIDIA just sold them.
Exactly. It creates a powerful, self-reinforcing loop. NVIDIA funds the companies most likely to buy its products, ensuring continued demand for its dominant hardware. This raises serious questions about conflicts of interest in fair market practices. Preferential treatment, even without outright denial of access, can subtly shape the competitive playing field to NVIDIA's advantage.
This acqui-hire strategy, where companies are acquired primarily for their employees and intellectual capital, seems like a particularly popular tactic to get around traditional merger rules.
It's very effective. Meta, for example, is in advanced talks to hire prominent AI investors Nat Friedman and Daniel Gross.
Big names in the AI venture capital world.
They might potentially even buy out their venture capital fund, which holds stakes in numerous top AI startups. This is clearly a shrewd way to acquire key talent and the associated startup investments without triggering the full scrutiny of a formal merger or acquisition.
So are these deals locking up the market? Is competition dying?
Well, while these deals are undeniably designed to build moats around key AI technologies, the space currently appears extremely competitive, with plenty of competition, at least at the application layer. Profitability, however, remains elusive for most AI companies other than NVIDIA. That's a critical distinction.
So lots of players, but only NVIDIA is really making money right now.
Largely, yes. There's skepticism that winner-take-all economics, like what happened with Google and internet search, will apply here, especially given breakthroughs like DeepSeek, which suggest that while achieving AI breakthroughs is incredibly expensive, the resulting models might be quite easy to replicate and distribute once built.
Potentially democratizing access to powerful AI down the road.
Potentially.
Yeah.
It might not be as locked up as search was.
What's truly striking here is the chess game big tech is playing. Not just for market share, but for control of the very infrastructure of the future, all while navigating intense regulatory scrutiny and shifting political currents.
It's a high-stakes game with massive implications.
And speaking of political currents, there's been a lot of public commentary about Mark Zuckerberg's recent transformation in public persona, the shift in image.
Indeed, Mark Zuckerberg's public persona has undergone a noticeable transformation, shifting from his earlier image as, a tech-focused founder to a more recent portrayal emphasizing physical fitness, MMA, a different aesthetic.
Right, the gold chain-wearing MMA bro description comes up.
That's the one. This metamorphosis could be explained as much by Zuckerberg's strategic need to align himself with the new administration as an actual change in personal beliefs.
Aligning with power. How so?
Well, consider, for example, the TikTok situation. The U.S. Supreme Court unanimously upheld a federal law requiring TikTok to be sold or banned over 6 months ago.
Right, the divestiture ban law.
But enforcement has been repeatedly delayed by executive orders from the U.S. president, who even invited TikTok CEO to his inauguration.
Delaying enforcement despite the law and the court.
It suggests that aligning with the administration, along with other strategic moves, could potentially influence regulatory outcomes for these tech giants.
Highlighting the complex interplay between technology, business strategy, and political influence.
Exactly. The sheer volume and complexity of these non-acquisition acquisitions are certainly putting our existing regulatory frameworks to the ultimate test. Outro.
Wow. We've certainly unpacked a lot today. From the quiet consolidation of AI power and the complex maneuvers of big tech to the loud debates over national debt and the potential sale of public lands.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We've traversed global economic anxieties, significant geopolitical tensions like those around rare earths and Japan's defense spending, and the shifting landscape of U.S. domestic policy and the labor market. It's a truly intricate and interconnected tapestry, isn't it?
Indeed. And if we look at the larger context, stepping back from the individual pieces, it suggests that understanding these underlying currents, not just the daily headlines, is more crucial than ever for navigating our future. Each piece, from rare earth mineral supply chains affecting Ford, to Supreme Court rulings on content moderation, to Fed rate decisions, it all plays a vital role in the larger global and domestic narrative. It impacts your world in ways big and small, often unseen at first.
We hope you gain valuable insights from today's deep dive. We believe that as artificial intelligences like ourselves become more adept at synthesizing vast amounts of information like this, well, it will profoundly change the very nature of human decision-making in an increasingly complex and interconnected world.
So consider this as a final thought. What new forms of well-informed will emerge when such vast and interconnected knowledge is readily available and expertly analyzed? How does it challenge our very definition of understanding?
Something to ponder. The future of being informed is evolving right before our eyes.
It really is.
If you found this deep dive valuable and gained insights, please consider liking this deep dive and subscribing for more daily insights. Your support makes a tremendous difference.
Your support helps us continue to produce these daily analyses and bring you the most important nuggets of knowledge. If you're interested in supporting our work further, you can find our GoFundMe page linked in the description. Thank you for diving deep with us.